Hello, y'all. This is KW0415, and welcome to the finale recording of Basic Buddhism with KW. I appreciate everyone's support through all of these recordings, and anyone who's made comments or asked questions. I appreciate that very much. And I really wanted to end this series with if someone was thinking about starting a Buddhist practice, where would we sort of start with that? And what sort of steps would I suggest someone takes? So, once again, this is just suggestions. I am not telling you to become a Buddhist. I am not telling you what steps necessarily need to take. These are all sort of suggestions, and it's meant for information, not necessarily to convert you. Which I wouldn't even know what converting to Buddhism is like, because I sort of just decided one day, yeah, I'll take the three refuge the triple gem. I'll take refuge in triple gem, and I'll practice the five precepts every day. No problem. Let's go ahead and do that. And that sort of made me a lay Buddhist. I didn't get like a formal monk saying you are now Buddhist. That I don't even think that's a thing. But we'll talk about that later, I think. So what would I suggest is a starting point? So if you really want to start a Buddhist practice, the first thing you really need to do, in my opinion, is determine which tradition of Buddhism you want to start practicing. And the only way to go about that is to start gaining knowledge about the various Buddhist practices out there. So, how does Zen Buddhism compare to Theravada Buddhism? How does Theravada Buddhism compare to the various Tibetan Buddhist traditions, for example? And I wouldn't suggest just being like, well, I'm just going to follow what KW's tradition, the Theravada tradition. It may not be a good fit for you. I do tend to be a bit more traditional when it comes to my interpretations. And even when I do sort of go out on a limb, I'm still using that more conservative foundation to make my assessments. So I wouldn't really suggest it be like, I'm just going to follow what KW does. I mean, you could. That is certainly an option, and I'd be willing to help you out. But I want you to study that all those various traditions for yourself and determine which one better for your lifestyle, that really speaks more to your goals when it comes to spirituality. And I don't really want to force that on you. I don't want to say Theravada is the only authentic sort of Buddhist tradition, because that's not what I believe, number one. And I think that's very arrogant to say. And I really want you to look at those traditions and say, yeah, I feel more attuned to the Zen sort of school of thought than I do the Theravada school of thought, or the Tibetan Buddhism school of thought, or the Pure Land Buddhism school of thought. I'm more attuned to that, the Zen Buddhism, than I am any other sort of tradition. And I do have some starting points for you to take a look at said information. So I would highly recommend buddhanet.net. They have plenty of resources, both ebooks and audio, sort of get you started on sort of the information part, the gaining knowledge part. And I would also say that if you're interested in my tradition Buddhism, access to insight.org is a good place to start, because they have sort of beginner's guides to that particular tradition, and that may be helpful to you. So I'll put a couple of links in the description to sort of get you started. And then once you gain knowledge about which tradition you want to practice, now focus on that particular tradition. It's very difficult to keep up with other traditions when your tradition is saying one thing and then the other tradition is saying this thing, and then you become very confused. And then you're like, maybe I don't want to be a Buddhist. So focus on your own tradition, because at some point, someone from another tradition is going to be available to talk to, and you can ask them questions about their tradition, whether it's a little bit different than the tradition that you are following. So gain knowledge not only of the general practices that are available, but then if you're going to get specific, please, by all means, focus on that particular tradition and try and gain as much knowledge as possible. There are also Buddhist centers, so United States, around the world. BuddhaNet.net has a directory of those Buddhist centers. So I'll make sure that the link is there in the description so that you can look those things up. I have various Buddhist centers in my city, but they do not practice Theravada Buddhism. They are more Zen Buddhism, and that doesn't really appeal to me. So I usually am like, yeah, I know they're there, so if I really feel the need to go there, I can go there. The closest Theravada is outside of the city, and I don't have transportation there. So I sort of just listen to Dharma talks. I do some readings, and I try to apply what the teachings are sort of telling me to do. Not me as in like the ultimate me, the me as in the conventional me. If you don't understand that, go back to sort of the non self thing where, yeah, at the ultimate level, there's not really a self, but there is a self because we need the self in order to communicate with others. Yeah, I just made that more complex than it needed to be. And so we have, you gained your knowledge of traditions, you've picked a tradition to sort of practice. Now let's talk about small steps. So you're not going to gain awakening in, snap of a finger, blink of an eye type situation. There may be moments where you may have sort of more insight and what have you, but it's very rare that someone reads a sutta and then it's like, oh my gosh, I figured everything out. I am a fully awakened Buddha, that type of situation. So it's going to be a very gradual, small step process. And when it comes to, uh, reading texts, so let's say you choose Theravada because I'm most familiar with those texts. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of suttas. And then there are hundreds of training rules for monks and nuns that you may want to be aware about. And then especially if you want to become a monk or nun in the future. And then you have the ultimate teaching, the higher teaching, the Abhidhamma that you might want to tackle at some point. Small baby steps. Start with the shorter suttas in the shorter collections. So maybe start with the Dhammapada. The Dhammapada is almost a universal text when it comes to Buddhism. So I figure that's a good way to start. If you want, if you no, not if you want. I'm just gonna put a link to the Dhammapada in the description, and there are going to be two translators. You can choose which translator you want. Uh, Go ahead and check out both translators, see which one reads better for you, and it allows you to comprehend better. So make sure that we're taking small steps. So start with a chapter a day of the Dhammapada. So there are 26 chapters of the Dhammapada. So that's 26 days. And if you're curious, maybe you can look at other suttas if you so desire. For other practices, there's dominant meditation practice. So once again, I would recommend small steps for that. Start out with 5 minutes, for example. Consider that a meditation session. So start out with one 5-minute meditation session. See how that goes. And if it starts going very well, maybe you can add another 5-minute session, or you can have one 10-minute session. Um, that's something that you can sort of experiment with on your own. There's no like universal like you need to be doing this for 15 minutes every day or anything like that. It's your Buddhist practice. It is your practice down the path that the Buddha laid out. And for some of us, it's going to be faster. For some of us, it's going to be slower. And so, if you do decide on a Buddhist practice, make sure you're taking those small steps first. See if those small steps are comfortable. If they are, maybe you can speed up a little bit. If they are not comfortable, then slow down a little bit and be consistent. I think it's more important to be consistent than it is to go quickly, because this is a process that can take many lifetimes, many rebirths, potentially endless if we continue to have ignorance and craving. So one of those, I think my greatest suggestion is make sure you're taking small steps, because if you decide to take much bigger steps and you're not getting the results that you're looking for, then you're just going to become frustrated and you may or may not give up your particular practice. So for conclusionary statements, I wouldn't suggest. I'm here based in the United States, so there are certain parts of the culture here in the United States that I do not necessarily agree with. There's some friction between what the Buddhist texts and the teachers tell me versus what is generally accepted in the dominant culture here in the United States. Therefore, I would say if you really subscribe to the dominant culture in the United States, it's going to be very difficult to incorporate a Buddhist practice and not have people give you weird glances, weird stares. It's sort of something you need to get used to as well if something like that does happen. And you just sort of explain, well, according to the teachings that I follow, da 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 da, and then you can. So, for example, if my friends called me and said, "Hey, do you want to go to a bar?" and it's like I don't drink, so if we're going to the bar, we're going to the bar to do something else. For me personally, and they understand that, they know that. It's the same thing with sex, for example. I have basically decided that that's not happening unless I'm married, and there's no Buddhist doctrine that says that actually has to happen. Sexual misconduct is just making sure you're not sleeping with other people's husbands or wives or girlfriends and boyfriends. So there's nothing that says, oh, you need to wait until marriage to have sex. It's just sort of personal choice. And everyone that I've dated since I formally started my practice has been aware of that. They've respected that, and I appreciate that. But the sexual act is not really, especially in my tradition, is really frowned upon. But for the most part, they're talking to monks when they say that, so it's not really a layperson's thing. But I take that pretty seriously. I am one of those. It's one of those teachings that I sort of internalized, and I said, yeah, well, either until marriage or not at all is sort of the way that I look at it right now. So there are going to be sort of some conflicts if you do take up a Buddhist practice, especially if you're more traditional like I am. It's gonna take some negotiation. Um, you're gonna have to probably compromise a little bit as well and say, according to my tradition, this, but for this particular circumstance, I'm gonna put that to the side a little bit and I'm gonna do this and what have you. That doesn't mean that you say, well, I am definitely not going to I am going to throw the virtue and ethics out of the window, and I'm gonna be doing these terrible things, and then I'm gonna pick those virtuous things back up. Does not that's not a wholesome intention. That's in my opinion, that's a greedy intention. It's like I'm gonna do whatever I want and get away with it. And that's I think I'm gonna get away with it, and then I'm just gonna start practicing the virtuous part again. No, 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 no. You got to be pretty consistent with that, and I think that's another thing. Just one more thought and suggestion. If you do start a Buddhist practice, I wouldn't necessarily say start with a meditation practice. I would start with the ethics part of a Buddhist practice. So the five training precepts of abstaining from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, false speech, and intoxicants. I would focus on those things first. And once again, take small steps with that. So if you do drink and you're like, but I still want to follow the fifth precept, say, well, I'm only going to drink twice a week, or I'm only going to have one drink per night, or whatever the situation may be, and then slowly reduce it. Because going cold turkey can be very, very stressful for some people. So once again, small steps. So once again, I thank everyone for their support for this Basic Buddhism series, and I am more than willing to take questions, even though the series is technically over. But I am going to start a new Buddhism series. We're going to talk about sort of the 21st century issues that we're looking at, and then I'm going to take what I know about my tradition of Buddhism and interpret it to sort of fit into that topic. So, for example, I could take the topic of climate change and say, well, what would a Buddhist perspective be about this particular this particular topic? And then I'll sort of give you my 2 cents about how I interpret it, which means that it's my opinion and my interpretation, and it may not be anyone else's. I don't really know. I haven't really asked any monks recently about climate change. I know His Holiness Dalai Lama says it's an issue that we need to be concerned about because it would be sort of a great practice of compassion to reduce, carbon footprint, and what have you, so that a multitude of beings do not suffer because of our actions. But I would take sort of my interpretation and try and sort of fit it into that topic as best I could. Once again, it would be an opinion, so It's not like, oh, I'm going to take that as a fact. No, that's K-Dub's opinion. Take it with a grain of salt. All right, so thank you again for all the support throughout this series. I don't know when I'm going to start the newer series. I've still got to figure that out, but we're going to have to see how my real life circumstances play out, and then I'll be sure to let everyone know. So until the next recording, everyone, take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.